Hello, my name is Wendy Gladney, author, speaker, and life coach. My subjects include, but are not limited to, healing without hate, how to forgive to live, building a business while balancing a life, and learning how to turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. To learn more, visit www.wendygladney.com or call 951-313-4732. Thank you. Hello. Today's speech is about empowering women, and the title is Discovering the Diamond Within You. Henry Kissinger once said, "A diamond is a chunk of coal that is made good under pressure." Are you ready to find that diamond within you? Let's get started. Well, good morning, Riverside. How are you? It's so good to be here. For some of you, you may not know, but Riverside is actually my home. I was born here. I was raised here. I actually attended about 5 elementary schools, but I attended Central Middle School right across the street. Anybody here from Central? There's usually always one of us in the room. And then I also went on to attend Poly High School. Anybody from Poly? Before going on to college at UCLA. Well, I'm not going to hold you long because I know you have a full day today with a lot of different activities going on. But I want to share a few things with you and hopefully give you a few nuggets that you'll be able to take away with you and be able to build something from this day on. Now, you know that your theme is discovering the diamond in you. Now, we also know it takes a while to become a diamond. A diamond is not something that just happens overnight. As a matter of fact, Henry Kissinger once said that a diamond is a chunk of coal that is made under pressure. Do you understand that? That a diamond is something that is made, it's a piece of coal under pressure, which means that sometimes to be your best, you got to be able to endure some pressure. And life is full of pressure. Also, Mary McLeod Bethune once said, "Invest in the human soul, and who knows, it might be a diamond in the rough." That's what we're doing here today. We're investing in you, and you're investing in us. Because did you know that we need each other? It's not about just the older women touching the younger women. It's about you also touching our lives. For example, when I was talking to you about social networking and Facebook, I'm 48 years old, and I knew nothing about social networking. So I have a daughter 26, and I have cousins that are younger than me, and they were like, "Wendy, you've got to get hip. You've got to learn about how to do this, because with what you do for a living, it's important." So we need each other. We teach you things, but there's also things that you can teach us. And it's important to always remember that the choices that you make today will determine the outcome of your tomorrows. So sometimes when you're under that pressure, you have to be careful not to give in to peer pressure that will take you away from what God has for your life. And I'm going to tell you, I know that this is true because the future does determine on the patience that you have today and what you do with it. For example, when you see a glass and it's at the halfway mark, do you see it as half empty or half full? Because whether you know it or not, your attitude will determine your altitude in life. When you're given lemons, do you make lemonade and decide to even open up a lemonade business? Or do you walk around with a sour face because you didn't get what you wanted or because it wasn't sweet? Have you heard of sugar? You can add a little sugar to that lemons and make lemonade and turn it into a business. I know it's true because oftentimes when we see people, we make judgments. For example, and I can't see you really well, but do we have any athletes in the room? Okay. Do we have any dancers or singers or young ladies trying to aspire to become entertainers? Okay. Now, with doing that, does it take practice? Does it take time? Does it take commitment? And by doing that, sometimes do you have to give up some things that you would really like to do, like hanging out at the mall or hanging out with your friends? And maybe sometimes you even have to give up going to some of the dances and some of the get-togethers and parties because you have to put in the time to become the best at what you want to become. Don't think it's going to be handed to you. Because while you're out there doing whatever and lollygagging, somebody else is putting in the work. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have a balanced life, because being balanced is very important as well. But if you want to become the best at whatever God has put into you, you got to put in the time, the sweat, and the effort. Oftentimes, when my kids were coming up, I know I got on their nerves. My son is 21 at UC Irvine, and my daughter's 26. She actually graduated from Spelman, and she's now actually working on being an actress. And I used to always tell them to get up. And a lot of times that's just because what my grandmother told me. And I'd say, but Mother dear, it's 5:30. She said, yes, you're already a half an hour late. And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? And she'd say, well, if you don't have anything to do, I'll give you a list. She'd have us sweeping off the porch, pulling up weeds. So you had to find something. And if you didn't have something after that, she'd say, read a book. You know, it's like, so we would sit around sometimes in the afternoon reading a book. But do you know that that made a big difference in my life? That made a difference between sometimes when I was going after certain things in life. Because, you know, sometimes it's not always just the best person that gets it, but it's about the person who endures. It's about the person who gets up and puts in whatever it takes. And sometimes it's even about just showing up. Some of you may not know the jewels that you'll receive today just because you showed up today. When you could have maybe, now some of you may not have had an option because your guardian or your parents said you were going whether you wanted to or not. But for those of you that also had an option, the fact that you chose to come here today, you will receive something if you're open about it and you decide to make a difference about what you receive here today. So I want to encourage you that when you look at someone and you think, she thinks she's cute. When I was growing up, people used to think that all the time. They say, you think you're cute. I didn't think I was cute because you didn't have an idea of where I came from. Because for my background as a child, it was not a pretty picture. But people would oftentimes look on the outside, and if you're bubbly and outgoing, then they think, who does she think she is? And then we pass judgment on that person. And you don't know, you might be giving up a chance to have a best friend that can be good to you. So you have to be careful when you judge people. You see, when I was a little girl, my mother left me. And it was mainly because my mother was white, my father was African American, and my mother's family disowned her when she had a black child and married a black man. My mother was young. My mother was only 18 years old, and she couldn't handle that. And because of that, she left me. And I also have a brother by the same mom. So we were left as little kids. Now, we were blessed because we had a grandmother who cared about us and made sure we were not out on the streets. But for all children, we always wonder, where's our mom? Especially for someone like me who always was told, you look just like your mother. Well, what does that mean to me if I don't even know who my mother is? So as time went on, I went to look for my mother. Because again, we all want to know where we come from. We always want to know what our roots are. So when I was about 18 years old in college, I went to look for my mom. Like I told you, I grew up right here in Riverside. My mother lived in the Palm Springs area. That is not across the world. That is right down the street. And I didn't even get to know my mother until I was 18. And when I was 18 years old, my mom had remarried. And she was married to a white gentleman who didn't even know that I existed. And so when I met her, I wasn't welcomed back into her life at that time. It would be another 12 years. It would not be until I was 30 years old that my mother truly came back into my life. And what happened was I got a call one day. And my mom said, Wendy, Eric, that was her husband, has died. And he left me homeless, and I have nowhere to go. So I was married at the time. I had 2 young kids. And I looked at my husband, and I said, well, my mom has called. And he said, well, you've been praying for this. So here it is. And he said, all right, go ahead, go get her. So I packed up my kids, and me and my kids drove down to Palm Springs. At the time, I lived in Upland. And we picked up my mom, and my mom came and lived with us. I took care of my mother for 11 years. And she passed away 7 years ago. And although my mother was never the mother that I really needed, because it's too hard to go into a lot of it right now, but she never said, I love you, Wendy. She never did a lot of things that I longed for. But what I learned actually at her funeral was that she was the grandmother my children needed. Because my daughter got up and she said, "Mom, may I say something?" And I said, "Yes, honey." I said, "That's your grandmother." And that's exactly the words she used. She said, "I just want to publicly thank my mother for letting my grandmother come and live with us. Because if she had never come to live with us, I would have never known her, and I would have never known that side of our family." So sometimes it's not always all about you. It's also about being a conduit sometimes for what God has for your life. That's part of that pressure of becoming a diamond. Because pressure is about what's not comfortable. Sometimes it's not about being comfortable, it's about comforting others. And also, when people would ask me, "Well, how could you love her?" Well, how could I not? The Bible tells me to honor my mother and my father. And it doesn't say if they act right. It says to honor your mother and father. Now, while I was going through all of this as a child and dealing with abandonment issues of not having my mom around, and also, just to be honest with you guys, being different, because you have to understand, you guys live in a whole different generation. We have a black president now. When I was coming up, we didn't have that. And so for me, growing up on the east side of town, I got picked on all the time for being something I had no control over, just because my hair was a certain way or my skin was a certain way, But at the end of the day, God has a plan. And I understand that now, because also as a child, my father was a very colorful person. He was very interesting. And while I was a child, my father was actually ran a gambling house. My dad was actually a pimp, a drug dealer, and a whole lot of other things. And because of that, I became a victim of sexual abuse to my father beginning at 6 years old. And I was sexually abused by my father for many years. And then one day, my grandmother said to us, my brother and I was in high school, and she said, "Wendy, your dad has had a heart attack, and you need to go to the hospital, and you need to be able to go say goodbye to him." So, being obedient, and also having the training of my grandmother, I went to the hospital to see my dad, and that was in the 1970s. And I looked at my dad and I said, "Daddy, I just want you to know that I forgive you for everything you've ever done to me." Now, that had nothing to do with my power. That had everything to do with the power of the Lord inside of me. But I truly forgave him. And what was interesting is, although the doctors thought that he was going to die, my father actually lived for another 20-something years. And during that time, my dad changed his life and turned his life around. And my dad went from being a pimp to a preacher. And a true one. I mean, believe me, we sent him through the ringer. I was actually in college during the time when he gave his life to the Lord, regave his life to the Lord, because the word also tells us if you train up a child in the way they should go, they will not depart. It may take them a few years, but they won't depart. And so I was at college. I was over at UCLA, and I got a phone call one day from my dad, and he said, "Wendy, I just want to tell you something." I go, "Yes, Daddy." He said, "God has called me to preach." I said, "Look, Daddy, we just wanted you saved, that's it, don't," and I even said, "Dad, don't start pimping the church, okay? Just don't start doing that, okay?" And over time, he proved himself. And you know what? There is power in prayer, because there were a lot of people praying for him. And be careful what you pray for, because you may just get it. And the point is, are you going to be able to accept it? Are you going to be able to handle it if you get what you pray for? And so I know that after going through everything that I went through in life, that God had a plan for me, and that it was bigger than me, and that I knew that there were a lot of people out there that if I had a voice, and if they could hear my story or what I've been through, that they too can know that no matter what they are going through currently or what they've been through in the past, that you can go from victim to victorious. And that you can become brilliant, and you can become that diamond that God has for you. So I want to tell you, don't get weary in well-doing. Don't give up. And sometimes you can't even look to the right or to the left. You have to keep looking straight forward. And when you